T.S. Eliot's groundbreaking modernist poem, The Wasteland, draws its name from the Arthurian legend of the wounded Fisher King, whose lands will rejuvenate when he is healed, as well as other literary and philosophical sources, referring to the physical and spiritual wasteland of modern society, which has become corrupt and in need of healing. In 1921, Eliot was still trying to find his way through the troubled, disordered landscape of what was to become his most famous poem. Under the influence of his friend Ezra Pound, The Wasteland was crafted. Before we unpack the poem, it's important to note the two key symbols that speak to the titular landscape itself: the wasteland as symbolic language and the wasteland as sick or corrupt body. For the former, as signaled through both sound and image, the wasteland symbolizes spiritual apathy and corruption. Derived in part from Arthurian legend, the wasteland is more accurately a symbolic landscape that places a hero or series of heroes in conflict with natural and supernatural forces. In Homer's Odyssey, the protagonist spends many years roaming before he finds his way home, encountering various monsters and storms along the way. In John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, the action is placed in a symbolic landscape, where the topographical features represent evil, corruption, temptation, and diligence, faith, and fortitude. The dry stones, arid country, clutching roots, dead trees, absence of water, and the relentless sun are the key visual descriptions of the symbolic landscape. All of the light coming through in this strange atmosphere is unnatural, supernatural, and unreal, existing outside of physical laws. The light seems artificial, and the landscape seems dead. This indicates a society lacking in energy and in need of rejuvenation. The dead surroundings also seem to have deadened all the personae who inhabit the wasteland. They are emotionless shells of people, like voices, caricatures, or ghosts. Only the reader, whose mind is traversing the landscape, is alive in it. This places the reader in the hero's viewpoint, and the response to various obstacles in the landscape allows the reader to gauge what kind of character they possess. As for the latter symbol, the wasteland as sick or corrupted body, on another level, the waste indicates a corruption, an excess of energy or vitality that has made the body and spirit ill. There are poisonous flowers, brown fog, perhaps indicating poisonous air or pollution, rats, and dead bodies. The degree to which characters in the wasteland falter is registered through the many references to their blindness, sickness, and boredom. The poem's spiritual test, which Eliot derived partly from the Grail quest, is for the hero to overcome apathy, to acknowledge his own illness in the first place. Only then can a healthy energy and calm be restored. It could be argued that The Wasteland dramatizes Eliot's illness and recovery, where the poisonous, corrupt, and restless body of the first few sections finds peace and calm in the final section. A letter Eliot wrote in December 1921 indicates that the therapy he was receiving helped him overcome his loss of the power of concentration and attention, as well as his manner of becoming a prey to habitual worry and dread of the future. As for the poem, in part 1, The Burial of the Dead, the speaker opens the poem by noting that April is the cruelest month, pointing out how, paradoxically, life grows out of death. The speaker is a key character who highlights the key themes in the poem and introduces all the other characters and speakers. However, this speaker is simultaneously difficult to distinguish from the other personae, not the least because the lines often do not explicitly identify who is speaking. For example, while part 1 opens with an almost conventional perspective on the cruelty of April, it appears to introduce new speakers several times, without any use of quotation marks or attribution. It's so difficult to distinguish characters in this poem, it could be argued that the speaker is also Madame Sesostris, Tiresias, the Fisher King, all of whom pop up in the poem, among others. The narration shifts to a lake near Munich, Germany, and to a speaker identified as Marie. She tells of being surprised by the arrival of summer, of enjoying coffee and conversation, and then of a childhood memory of sledding in the mountains. Abruptly, the perspective shifts back to a description of the clutching and decrepit plant life in this dry environment. Here, the sun is unmerciful, and the trees provide no shelter. There is no water. The perspective changes once again, this time to a dialogue in which someone describes being given hyacinths. Another voice notes that upon returning from the hyacinth garden, she was blind and could not speak. Next, the speaker introduces Madame Sesostris, a clairvoyant who has a pack of tarot cards and lays them out, one after the other. She's another key character. Through her tarot cards, Madame Sesostris predicts many events and personages to come. The Phoenician sailor appears on one of the cards she lays out here. and that character later appears in Part 4. The Hanged Man, meanwhile, is not found among the cards Madame Sosostris lays out, but considering this tarot card refers to the ancient fertility rite of self-sacrifice, he figures prominently whenever those themes are featured, including references to Phlebas the Phoenician, the drowned sailor, the Fisher King, and the restoration of the wasteland. She turns over a card for the speaker. Indeed, it is the drowned Phoenician sailor with pearls for his eyes. The speaker says that she sees people walking in a circle. Finally, the speaker describes a winter day in London and a long procession of people walking over London Bridge. The speaker then meets a man the speaker knows and asks him a series of strange questions about a corpse planted last year in the man's garden. Will it bloom this year? In Part 2, a game of chess, a woman sits on a chair that looks like a burnished throne. It's elaborately designed. The woman sitting on a chair is one of the key characters in the poem, and one who is ill or injured in some way. She's described living in absolute luxury, surrounded by perfumes and artwork, strange patterns on the ceiling, strange odors, ornate artwork, sculptures, and furniture. However, she has a story to tell. She has bad nerves, gets no sympathy from her partner or lover, and is witness to physical and spiritual corruption in the figure of Lil. However, she seems to show no sympathy for Lil, who suffers from some of the same problems as she. Abruptly, the woman's hair spreads out in flames, which form into words, and the conversation continues. The first speaker wants to go for a walk and then play a game of chess. They are preparing for a knock upon the door. Then another conversation begins between the speaker and someone named Lil, whose husband Albert had been in the war. The discussion includes warnings about Lil's declining looks and finances. Lil has had many children by Albert, but she tells the speaker that she's taken pills in order to have an abortion. Finally, Albert arrives home, and the speaker gives farewells. In Part 3, the Fire Sermon, the speaker describes a broken landscape. Everyone is left, then describes how they sat down and wept with the sound of rattling bones nearby. In an abrupt shift, the speaker breaks into song, then tells of Mr. Eugenides, a fig merchant from Smyrna, who asks the speaker to lunch with him. And then the speaker abruptly identifies himself as Tiresias, who can see the lives of people, including a sailor and a typist drying her undergarments. Tiresias, too, is a central character. He had spent 7 years living as a woman and was asked to settle a bet for Zeus and Hera. Who experienced more sexual pleasure, men or women? After answering that women did, Tiresias was instantly blinded by Hera, but given the gift of prophecy by Zeus. In a note to the poem, Eliot said that Tiresias was the most important figure in the poem, and that he united all the other characters. Here, he will await an expected guest, who turns out to be a pimply agent's clerk. The clerk sexually assaults the typist. Tiresias explains that he has foresuffered this experience. The agent's clerk then departs. The woman is relieved that the ordeal is over, and she puts a record on the gramophone. The speaker describes mandolin music he hears beside a public bar on Lower Thames Street. Fishermen lounge near a beautiful church along the river. After that, readers hear a series of songs about the river and nautical life, drifting boats, church bells, and finally a dusty urban landscape. The part ends with what sounds like a prayer or sermon. In Part 4, Death by Water, in this short part, the speaker tells of Phlebas the Phoenician, who, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls and the deep sea swell and the profit and loss. His drowned body is decomposing. The speaker asks you who turn the wheel to consider Phlebas, who was once as handsome and tall as you. And in Part 5, What the Thunder Said, the speaker refers to what has come before, including fire, icy silence, and stony places, and notes that this is a place with only rocks and no water. And there is not even silence, only dry, sterile thunder without rain. Referring to someone wrapped in a cloak, the speaker wonders about a third person that walks beside you. The speaker describes the falling towers of Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, and he concludes, unreal. Shifting again, the speaker describes a woman with long hair who fiddled whisper music on those strings, and bats, and towers with tolling bells, then tumbled graves and an empty chapel. The scene shifts to the Ganges River and the sound of thunder. In a chanting tone, the speaker repeats a series of almost fable-like verses about the thunder, which leads to a sequence spoken by someone fishing. It includes songs, poetry in English, Italian, and French, and a final chant-like closing. As readers may have noticed, ennui and promiscuity, self-sacrifice and foresight, and clairvoyance are the poem's key themes. Eliot was diagnosed with neurasthenia, which was a medical condition believed to be a result of nervous energy and exhaustion from an overactive mind and a fast-paced lifestyle. So he could sympathize with the experience of ennui, one of the symptoms of the condition. The wasteland is filled with bored, apathetic, and physically drained people, but ennui was often linked with sexual appetite in ways that were often uncomfortable to Eliot himself, who in his early 20s experienced nervous sexual attacks. Eliot was nevertheless traditional in respect to morals and sexuality. His poem could be understood as the prescription for his own illness and that of his societies. But Eliot was not simply targeting regular people, many of whom were ill, like him, and victims of other people's promiscuous behavior. In evoking the Arthurian legend and setting it in modern times, he was offering a critical evaluation of the grand ideals of his own culture and that of wider Europe. As for self-sacrifice, it's appropriate that both the nervous energy and flattening apathy of the first 3 parts of the poem are replaced by a little patience in the 5th part. In The Wasteland, Eliot champions a more generous, unselfish alternative to the sexual predation and ennui that had affected and infected his society. He included himself in the mix, and his poem was intended as part of the cure. Moreover, the antidote to ennui is self-sacrifice, which is evoked through the many images of trial and tribulation. The Cumean Sibyl, the Hanged Man, and Phlebas the Phoenician are notable instances of self-sacrifice. As for foresight and clairvoyance, numerous figures of prophecy appear throughout the wasteland, indicating Eliot's fascination with clairvoyance, insight, and prophecy. The Cumean Sibyl offers the first instance of a seer, or one who predicts events to come, who also anticipates the appearance of other clairvoyants, such as Madame Sosostris and Tiresias. But the main speaker, if the speaker is to be understood as omniscient, is perhaps the central figure of Foresight. The main speaker controls all the events, promises at various points to show various visions, and demonstrates a great deal of patience in working with the ill, nervous, and bored personae that interrupt the speaker's message. And in another sense, Foresight is part of Eliot's thematic representation of an author trying to control his own art, as well as a patient looking for a cure.